On a quiet evening in the bustling suburban neighborhood of Maple Street, James Marshall, a 50-year-old African-American man, stood on his front porch, sipping a warm cup of tea. The streets were alive with laughter from kids riding their bikes and the hum of distant conversations. James, a retired history teacher, had spent his life advocating for equality and understanding, despite facing discrimination himself. Tonight, however, would turn out to be anything but ordinary. Earlier that evening, James decided to treat himself to pizza, something he rarely did. He placed an order with a local pizzeria, expecting nothing more than a quiet meal. As he waited for the delivery, he thought about the past, moments when he had stood his ground against bigotry, teaching his students about the struggles of those who came before them. The doorbell rang. When James opened the door, he was greeted by a young man no older than 20. The boy, named Eric, had bright blue eyes and shaggy blonde hair. He wore the pizzeria's uniform, but his body language betrayed something simmering beneath the surface. "Here's your order," Eric muttered, avoiding eye contact. James smiled and reached for his wallet, intending to tip the boy generously. As he handed over the money, Eric's expression changed. His gaze hardened, and he suddenly stepped back, shaking his head. "You people always expect handouts, huh?" Eric sneered, his voice laced with contempt. James froze, his smile fading. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "You heard me," Eric said, his tone rising. "You're all the same, always looking for someone to blame for your problems. Maybe if you worked harder, you wouldn't need to bribe people like me with tips." James felt a surge of anger but kept his composure. "Young man, I don't know what you've been through to make you so bitter, but I won't tolerate this behavior on my doorstep," he said, his voice steady. Eric laughed bitterly. "What are you gonna do? Lecture me about racism? Save it. I've heard enough of that crap on the news." James stepped forward, his presence commanding despite his age. "Leave now," he said, "and think about what kind of person you want to be. Carrying hate in your heart will only poison you." But Eric didn't leave. Instead, he shoved James back, his movements fueled by anger and confusion. James stumbled but quickly regained his balance. "I won't fight you," he said, "but you need to go before you regret this." Eric's face twisted with frustration, and before James could react, the boy swung at him. The punch connected with James's jaw, sending him sprawling onto the porch. The neighborhood grew eerily silent as people began to notice the commotion. A few neighbors stepped out of their homes, their faces etched with shock. James lay on the ground, his vision blurry, but he could hear the murmurs of the crowd gathering. Eric stood over him, his chest heaving. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he shouted. James, despite the pain, managed to sit up. He looked Eric in the eye and said, "No, son, I don't think I'm better than you. I think you're better than this." Eric hesitated, his fists clenched. As the words sank in, the crowd began to close in, their disapproval evident. Someone called the police. By the time the officers arrived, Eric was sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. James, with a swollen cheek and a bloody lip, refused to press charges. "Let him go," he told the officers. "He needs help, not jail." The crowd murmured in surprise, but James stood firm. Eric looked up at him, his eyes filled with tears. "Why would you do that for me?" he asked. James extended a hand to help him up. "Because hate can't drive out hate. Only love can do that." Subscribe now to uncover heartfelt tales of courage, resilience, and redemption. Don't miss a moment. Be part of the journey where every story leaves an unforgettable impact.